All right, we're live. All right, everybody. Good to see and hear you today. We hope everyone's back from the restful Memorial Day weekend and had a chance to reload, recharge, just give this big hard push, especially as we head into the last bit of conference season. For those of you that are heading to Apartmentalize, got a chance to get together with Jose Benitez a while back through some intros through I think Nick from Durango. Does that remember correctly? Right?
Yeah.
Durango DKS, one of our customers, was chatting and say we should chat to Jose, and especially excited to have the conversation given that your background in building product manufacturing, obviously the supply side of things, getting into RenoWise and why, and then how you're moving and the success that you're having right now, how you're moving along and in delivering this value to customers, especially in that ever so popular right now conversation around turns and renovations. Certainly a lot of pain and attention being drawn out to how to be able the impact on revenue and rentable units. So dig in on that a little bit. Why what made you think about getting in that space? And then for everyone listening today, when we talk about getting to hell yes, obviously the conversation is about how could we be in the business of solving people's problems versus pushing our own products, right? And so how could we begin to prioritize that discovery around problem solving so we can really understand the urgency around our resident is looking to solve, and then ultimately what is the buyer is looking to solve, and then ultimately what are we seeking to how can we fit that problem with that prospect so that we're fitting their timing, fitting the problem they're trying to solve, and we're really helping them achieve their goals. That's what looks like a healthy yes buyer. So again, as always, it's brought to you by IRCX. We're AI remote maintenance software for property management industry. So if you're looking to solve problems without rolling a truck, we solve the problems around trucks and triage, and do it with our 3 lines of defense: our AI maintenance chatbot, our AI self-guided solution, and then our live guided solution. Folks listening, you're welcome to ask questions all throughout. We love the engagement. And as we always kick things off, Jose, a bit about your background. How did you get in this role? And then RenoWise. Why did you start RenoWise?
Yeah. Thank you, Guillermo. First of all, shout out to Nick for mentioning me on your last one with him. Great intro. Hard to top, but thank you for having me. Really excited to talk about what we're up to and how to get to hell yes. Great stuff. I've been watching your stuff and really excited to be part of it. Straight out of high school, I went into the labor side of the construction business while attending school full time. I really learned the ground up, the pace, the pressure, the process. Right before my son was born, I stepped more into the vendor side, quoting jobs, reading blueprints, supplying the materials for the projects. About more like 6 years now, stepped into the multifamily world, running renovation programs across the country for Lowe's. That's where I really supported the on-site teams, the C-levels, managing interior projects at scale. That full view, the labor, the vendor, the supplier, the operator, and being with the operators showed me where the chaos lives and why, and no one was really solving it. And through my own frustrations and seeing that there was really no tool to solve those challenges, is really where RenoWise was born. So about a year ago, we hit the ground running with the concept and the idea, and got live in the App Store, and here we are supporting a couple teams here in a couple different markets that slowly but surely.
So then that's a great intro, especially given that your background in the supply side from the parts and solving the problems there. Now the segue to an app store, so an app in the App Store. So what's the problem that the app solves?
Yeah, so really gearing up to understanding the on in the field. Those are really the key players to the renovation process. There's just so many different things, so many different tools that are they're managing, they're trying to navigate around, and we really put that on in-field focus. So it's like, hey, if we're going to create a platform that's not just going to help and create a solution for all these individuals, but where does their focus really need to lie on? And leading on to not just the App Store, but we do have a cloud-based platform that's also helping remote teams solve these different problems. But really leaning into the infield problem where maintenance needs to walk these units sometimes, and having the dedicated application that they just download, and it's straightforward. they take the pictures, they address the issues or request these units, and give updates as as we move forward.
So there's lots of other tech out there that kind of does this. Like there's some bigger ones. I mean, we don't really do that specifically, but like, how do you begin to differentiate around what RenoWise does for the field teams versus what's out there? And what else would they try today? Do they try using just taking pictures and sending SMS messages, or what else do they look for before they look at RenoWise as a solution?
Yeah, I guess that leads in more to like what we're solving and why it exists, right? Renovations in multifamily are still being managed through emails, texts, and just memory. There's no standard process. Property managers are already buried in side work. Vendors are lost. The communication is just a challenge. The regionals or C-levels don't have that visibility. That's where I feel like we really lean into fixing that. We give them a clean, structured workflow where they can submit, approve, assign, and track these units as they're going. And that really, that's where they say hell yes to realizing that it doesn't add work, it removes it. So we're really working on centralizing that aspect because there is no standardization. There is no standardization to this process now, or there hasn't been. And they're really working on bringing that and solving that.
So then you're solving for the renovation professionals.
Yeah. Well, not just the renovation professionals, because we're really leading into like the on-site teams and working with a lot of PMs that they're already dealing with these frustrations, and like back, kind of what I mentioned, where like they already have a lot going on, so it's already hard to manage renovations or turns and all that for that matter.
So give us an example. What happens today without RenoWise?
I mean, they're all spread out through spreadsheets, different tools, and miscommunication, and there's just so many different moving pieces to it, and the vendor communication is I think probably one of the biggest challenges, because when something happens, everyone's blaming each other and pointing the finger, and it's never anyone's problem. It really is.
So let's go back a bit. So the resident notifies the management company that they're not going to renew, and then what? And then let's call it 90 days, and then the clock starts ticking. So how do you guys? So just in terms of today, that's kind of what happens. So what do you do? How does RenoWise begin to solve the problems after that moment happens?
I think what happens today is they get notified, and then whether it's through their PMS system that they're trying to utilize to give notification to several different vendors, or however they're managing it. But ideally, every conversation that we're having, it's really like a bunch of tools, spreadsheets, and relying on outdated sometimes spreadsheets to have these communications, keep up with these these projects or schedules. A schedule is a really big problem. So not having something like RenoWise, really where something happens or things change, there's really no way to navigate through that, because it's just all over the place. And like I said, from me being on that side of it as a vendor, and then seeing and working closely with a lot of these ownerships, these management companies, and seeing the inefficiencies in these communications, and when something happens, they're just either it's just and every day, it's just back to the rent side of it. It's like everyday loss is on average like $50 to $70 a day that they're losing in rent potential. So when something happens or something goes wrong, or they switch a vendor, or they're not addressing the issues directly, and the communication is just so scattered between emails and texts and messages. That's where we really work on bringing it all together. Because
so then does the PMC, the property manager, initiate? Like, who's the first person to log into RenoWise?
So it can depend on different processes and kind of how we establish that. But thinking of more on the on-site side of it is the PM or maybe the service manager, the maintenance goes and requests that unit, because we're building different scenarios for different folks. Or some have a process where they have to request an intake to get that approval. And I think really leaning on what happened with COVID and all that. I think now there's more of a structure to trying to see if like we really need to renovate that, and then dictating that. And so in this scenario, like this use case would be they request it. That ownership side or the renovation team side would say, hey, they would receive that unit and say, hey, they have to make that, that judgment call where whether this is a full, partial, or certain scenarios where
Mhm.
what really needs to go into that unit. And then we give them the ability and the autonomy to dictate what that needs to be, and then bring in the vendors when they need to. And that's kind of where the workflow kicks off, and then everyone else receives that information, so they all have visibility, accountability, and transparency really lives all inside one platform.
So if it's so kind of in terms of, we solve the communication problem, solve the accountability problem, the transparency problem, solve the approvals problems, because all that's probably email and text and phone calls right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, if that, and maybe Teams messages, maybe
Yeah,
a bunch of other,
the carrier pigeon, right?
yeah, maybe, yeah, smoke signals.
And what do you got? These things, right? Yellow stickies all over the place.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's kind of how my mind looks like right now. My desk is like, but no, definitely for sure. I mean,
Okay, so then what happens if they don't seek to optimize that? So what do you see on a regular basis? So I'm a property manager. I've received a notice to not renew. So 90 days happens, the resident moves out. I'm going to go do an inspection, walk the unit. Correct me when I'm wrong here, right? I'm just, if I've got anything's wrong, I'm going to walk the unit. I'm going to find the deficiencies that I've got to charge the resident for. I'm going to find the things that I need to kind of make ready to make it available to lease. And then after the make ready is completed and the unit's leased, I've got kind of the first 60 days after the new resident moves in, where there's work orders that are typically related to make ready. Is that the highest level of how the whole thing happens?
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, that's kind of a way where that happens, where they learn, whether it's a resident that's either moving out or whatever really took place, and then kind of gearing up to that renovation or a turn. And there is a make ready process they have to establish. Yeah, that's kind of what that looks like in a sense. It might look like a little different to some teams, but yeah, I mean, and to lean into that. I mean, when there is no process, if that's where kind of things go wrong and things shift, and that's where there's just, and like I said, the PMs and the service managers don't have the capacity or the time to kind of manage those.
Yes. And so, like right now, you got let's say 1 to 100 building 3. So and actually, for clarification here, do you guys focus on the turns part or like renovations for a value add property?
It's a little bit of both, or we kind of branch off in different angles on that. We could focus on turns because ideally, we're set up where our process is straightforward, where we understand what their current cycles look like.
Yeah,
we plug it into our systems, and if on-site wants to request a turn or renovation, they fill out the information, just a quick on the app quickly what that looks like. And that's where different teams kind of get involved, and that's where they can dictate whether it's a renovation or just just a small partial that needs a couple little things. And that's kind of where we come in and build that for them and create that solution where they can really standardize that side of it.
Mm-hmm. So then your buyer's a property manager?
Yeah, our buyers, I think our hell yes buyer ideally would be maybe like a director of a construction company, or I'm sorry, on the ownership side of the company or the property management. But we really, we're tailored to owners and operators just all together. Because,
but not the GCs or the vendors. You're kind of like, your person that's going to pay to solve the problem is the property managers.
So GCs and vendors are utilizing the platform. But they're
more like
they're not like our focus. Yeah, because at the same time, these GCs and these vendors are providing these updates, and it also helps them stay paid, and there is transparency in there.
I get you. We have a similar kind of like setup where the buyer is not necessarily, they're part of a transaction because there's 2 or 3 people that are involved in the transaction, and the buyer is the property manager, the user group, right? When you take a look at the current way of solving the problem is like using spreadsheets, phone calls, text messages, yellow stickies, and that is all borne by either the maintenance supervisor on the building or maybe the property manager on the building, depending how they divide the roles.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I lean more into. I hate to keep throwing standardization into the mix, and
Yeah, I know. But it's what we're
but
talking about too, man.
sometimes that's what it is. Yeah, sometimes it varies by property, it varies by market region. It's
Mhm.
just or who's overseeing certain portfolios. It's just that's just what they're used to, and it's a lot of what we're seeing, and I think that's where when I was on the vendor side, I saw a lot of, and it's like almost feeling like the middle child of the industry, where we're kind of getting a little unnoticed. To really focus on operations, really focus on maintenance. And don't get me wrong, like those things are all important, but there really wasn't a process for the multifamily renovation side. So
Yeah, I just had a really big conversation with somebody around our great chat about some with one of the prospect around like everybody had autonomy to be their own CEOs. Like that was kind of like the language is like, run your property the way you want to run your property. But we're realizing that that's like not ultimately what owners want to buy. They want to buy a predictable, I want a no surprises business model, right? I don't want uh,
right.
a bespoke a la carte thing. I want McDonald's because it's like the same thing every day, all the time. And so, yeah, I hear you. We're talking about the same thing. And certainly there's a lot of
Yeah,
energy for
yeah,
that, right?
yeah. And if your process leaves when your tech quits, I mean, it was never really a process.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good one. No, definitely. And especially, and if your process and your data, like your people process data, if that whole thing moves out when someone leaves, like where was the work order? What vendors have been ordered? Where's the make ready? Where's the maintenance stack? If that all walks out the door, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
That
no,
never had anything in the
we're,
first
we're
place.
we're seeing a lot of that. It's unfortunate, but it's reality, and I think that's why we're super excited to bridge some of that gap, and
Yeah.
create a solution that is helping these teams.
So when they so the property manager is the one that feels the pain. So they're the ones that are seeking a solution. Um, right now they're looking to solve it. They might have a project manager, they may look to hire somebody. When they seek to solve the problem, like what do you notice? Like, do you notice that they've got how do you go at if you pick like 15 different project managers, all the same things being equal, what are you looking for to be able to identify these three are most likely to buy?
Uh, it's when they're really tell us they just don't have a process. It's quite frank. We're like, or like they don't know how to keep up with certain cycles, or what vendor goes in what, or
Mhm.
it's all spread out, and there's no consistency, right? I think that's
Mhm.
where we understand, like, hey, like, yeah, we'd be a solid case for what you have going on. I mean, that's most of the time we just don't have a real answer. I think we're
Yeah.
getting a lot of that. We're like, there is no answer to a standard process. They're just surviving the process. They're not really leading it.
Yeah, yeah. I just changed a line in our pitch deck where it says resident feels satisfaction feels lucky, meaning like the only reason why you get a good review was just luck. It wasn't actually because you planned it, designed it, architected for it. It just like the outcome you achieved was just a fluke. And if it's luck, then like to your point earlier, like do you really have something here that you can scale? Like or is it just like serendipity?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of that, and I don't know how much you're seeing of it. I know
Oh,
we
very much.
tackle it in different ways, but it's like they keep missing timelines. They need better visibility. It's hard to keep vendors on the same page. Like I said, no one owns the renovation process internally, so it's. I think sometimes leadership is scared to change what's kind of working.
Sure.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, once they see how much money and time they're losing, that's really where the conversation flips.
So are your folks like are the buyers that are buying, are they able to buy at the property level? Like can a property manager buy your software, or do they have to go up to a regional
Yeah,
director?
because our at least our business model, we're a per property model, so
Yeah.
we could work directly with us, whether it's a smaller group or just the property in general could wants to work
Yep.
with us. Yeah, we when we kind of built this, because I was I spent like the last 6 years working with ownership groups, so I built it around that concept, but yeah, we work directly with a lot of property managers that are utilizing our
Mhm.
platform, and so it could be direct, but sometimes it depends. Like if there's multiple properties in that portfolio and the ownership
Yep.
group wants to kind of get a hold of it, that's kind of where we tie in, kind of work more directly with the ownership.
So one thing that we're trying to figure out is like when I take a look at like it's one of those things I want to figure this out, but I don't like the answer I'm getting. Is like the people that are most inclined to innovate are the owner operators. I don't want to believe that, but it feels like those are the ones that are seeking change at a faster rate than obviously the independent owners. They have very little authority to make change, and then the operators, they're kind of hamstrung as well on that. They are the managers because they need to get approval from an owner to deploy, or even
Right.
or and also they have multiple owners they need to serve. So changing a process has to be able to be adopted by all the different ownership groups. Like when you're targeting the market, how do you manage through that? How are you managing through that?
Like you said, targeting a market specifically,
Yeah,
or
like are you or I mean maybe the problem doesn't exist. Like do owner operators, owners and managers, like if they're three different profiles, do they all buy the same way or do they buy differently for different reasons? Like how are you managing or navigating
yeah.
those
So if it's like,
realities?
if it's a portfolio that around that same ownership, we
Yeah.
really try to, sometimes it can vary between markets. Sometimes it can vary between properties depending on what the property looks like. There's,
Right.
different classes for those properties, or, whatever the situation might be. So we do tailor it around, more specific for the property. If that property is not used to doing, full scale renovations, or, whatever that looks like. Yeah, we work on, because you can't do it for everyone, right? Sometimes there's different things or nuances that kind of take play into to kind of how that works. So we look into that, and that's why we need to identify that beforehand, and
Hmm.
work with some of those teams to understand what that looks like, and what has worked and what hasn't, and then work on kind of together to build out a foundation for that.
Hmm. And then like when you're seeking to understand that and move towards that profile of buyers, like how do you do your discovery, or what kind of discovery questions do you put out there to start learning to understand, okay, these guys just shot kicking tires, they really want to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, it really boils down to how their process looks like now. I mean, who's managing this? Who's
Yeah.
what vendors do you have in place, or things like that. When I mean, it quickly shifts when there's really no answers to it, and that's the kind of back to that, what I said is like, you know turnover, and when there's turnover, and because that person was managing or doing things, and there's never a structure to that, or there's nothing internally that there was built out for that. That's where those are dead giveaways for us, saying like, hey, yeah, your process needs to be better. And sometimes it's just hitting them with that transparency and that reality that, hey, we're here to solve that problem and create a solution so that things get better, and you know NOI builds up.
Yeah. So how do you show them that it needs to
um
get better?
I mean, we break it down pretty simple. I mean,
Yeah.
our platform is straightforward, how to utilize it, and we also give them access to it, and I mean, honestly, that's really what it comes down to, because we could talk about it all day long, and
Hmm.
tell them what we're gonna do, but really executing is really where we're gonna change that, and show them that it really works.
So given that it's like it's that what you guys solve is a kind of like speed problem, right? How do you, which translates to cost, and the cost could be the cost to execute or just the lack of of an unleased unit. How do you go out there and show them that you're able to solve the speed problem?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that leads more into kind of what we talked about, maybe on like the timelines. There's always a timeline, and every day kind of counts. And what
Hmm.
I said about the 60 units, like one missed turn might not kill them, but 20 slow ones will bleed their NOI dry. So
Yeah.
I think really understanding that, because sometimes it's like, they're kind of just getting by, and they're so used to, old habits die hard. They're used to that process, and they're just kind of doing what they've always done, and sometimes leaning into that, and the transparency of that, and really providing a solution. I think, like I said, execution is everything, and I think that's why, when I built RenoWise, it was really based on that. It's like really relying, working with these on field teams, because that's really where it all kind of gravitated towards. It's like that's the biggest the biggest selling point is to take a page from Phil. It's maintenance is or the lower level is your marketing. So I think that's really we're focused on the on field teams, and really focusing on making it right for them, so that it snowballs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the tough part about like turns is it's a speed and quality problem. Like you can't have it if you have a bad turn and all of a sudden the resident moves in and their first impression is like the washer's still, the faucet's still not working. That's real problematic, right? So there's a cost, like in order of, it depends on the property, but speed, quality, cost. People usually say choose two, and but you can't choose two anymore. You got to figure a way to do all three, and doing it the old way is expensive and slow and vulnerable to quality. So it's not working, but people still keep trying to persist through it. So how do you figure out the ones that are willing to make a change? Like that you can show them the way, but that doesn't always work all the time. So how do you get the sense that they feel they need to make a change?
Yeah, and I guess leaning into what you mentioned, the bad turns and all that, and we really built that into RenoWise, and where things are need to be approved versus hey, the renovation's completed or it's finished, or the kit was delivered. There's more transparency to it, where the communication lives inside those workflows, where things got completed. Do they need to get approved, or do we need to go back and make a change, or sometimes vendor switches, where a vendor can't execute, where things happen, and that's where we really lean on those concepts, where like, hey, it's not just software. Here you go. It's more. There's more. There's more of a process to it. I hate to keep mentioning process, but
no, I get that. And
we're really
trying to get a sense for everybody to hear, and is like when you're selling a process fix. It's my experience, right? Is that people that's kind of like what their habit is. You're selling a habit change, and like getting people to change their habits is super hard, unless there's like, the habit to not eating chips might be that I've got a wedding I got to be in a suit for, or something like that, right? Like, why would I want to do something that changed in my life? And so like, kind of trying to get a sense of like what. This can be philosophical or the real thing, but like, what would make them want to change from their current example? Like, what's going wrong? What happened that would make them say, I am fed up with doing it this way. I'm going to go find a solution. Like, I'm losing my mind.
Yeah. And I guess that's leaning into, the empathetic side of it is, to stop pitching features, start asking better questions. And because if you don't understand the pain, you're not really solving anything. You're just throwing another platform at people who are already overwhelmed. Because this space, it moves fast because it's been burned before. So it's like you have to earn the trust by showing actually that you understand what they're dealing with, the workload, the pressure, the turnover. Because I feel like the best proptech doesn't sell on speed; it sells on clarity, and that's really what we're aiming to solve. And clarity only comes when you truly understand the pressure of what these teams are under. So although I've never been an operator, I've been on the vendor side. But I think back to what I said, it's never anyone's problem, but it really is everyone's problem. So I think,
see, we have the same problem. Like, we share the same problem in terms of a sales thing. Is like resident experience is not. It's rarely one person's problem, and it's kind of like a team game. And I'm finding it hard. I'd be curious to get, maybe you have a different answer. Maybe you solved it and I haven't. I'm finding it hard to get people to mobilize on something where a single person is not obviously accountable for it. So what ended up happening is we end up pitching to like a regional or an asset manager, because they're the ones where, the team game rolls up. It's like a team. Like if each individual player is not playing very well, the coach gets fired, right? So I kind of go to the management layer in corporate to talk about a building problem. And that's where we kind of like, we're not at hell yes yet with everybody we kind of motion for, because we're still trying to figure out the change between like a wide audience and then a narrow problem, and who's got authority to buy and who's got authority to implement change.
Yeah, 100%.
Kind of like they don't always exist in the same chair.
No, definitely not. No, and I've learned that a lot, from being a vendor for the last 6 years. And you got to get like an all-in buy-in when there's like an ownership focus, and then when there's a management focus, it could really, it could really depend. Like it's it's kind of spread out. So yeah, no, I think that you're right there, I think, with each other. And it's and it might continue to adapt and change, but I think for us on our side is just building on transparency.
So then when they're looking for answers, like they're kind of, like I said, that moment when they're just fed up, they're flipping a table, I'm done with this. What would they type into Google? What would they say? Okay, I need some answers here. And they go on a chat storm, or they go Scrum, they go somewhere, but they're gonna go type a question into somewhere. What's the question they're looking at that they ask?
Yeah, and I can answer that with we're a startup, so we need to probably do better on our SEO. But I think if we were to go and Google and kind of narrow down some of those keywords, it'd be like, multifamily term management software, interior renovation workflow, turn tracking platform, NOI improvement tools, maybe like a make-ready scheduling system, things like that. I think would be.
So would they be typing in like, how do I make my make-readies faster? How do I, because it's kind of like their language, right? So how do I make faster? How do I turn faster?
So our focus is renovations, but we do understand that make-readies, and shout out to Nick and his, cause he's doing a killer job in his market, providing a solid solution. But I think for us, obviously,
renovations are more complicated, right? There's measurements.
Yeah. So
there's countertops.
We can't start a renovation until the make-ready has been completed. So, and we're slowly but surely leading into, more make-ready side of it. But, renovations, can't take place. Turns can't take place until, maintenance or on-site has identified the make-ready, aspects of that. And that's kind of where it turns over to the vendor, or it turns over to, a different team to kind of manage, to get it ready for the tenant.
For the reno. And so when you guys do the reno piece, like those are bigger investments. So then the timeline is probably much more variable. Like, what do you see when you start asking people about their turn performance, which could be like 2 to 3 days, and their reno performance? How do you get a sense of what their reno performance is like?
Yeah. So, it kind of varies. I think generally, I think a 21-day renovation cycle is a solid one. We can get closer to, under 15, but, I think a lot of what I'm getting is, I think the great ones are where they tell me that they're renovated in 60 days. And that's not like a lot of time for on our side of it. So it's like, because when we built all, these programs for them, it's schedule based. So if, they're scheduling certain dates, they're really scheduled focused. So, these vendors need to come out on certain dates. And there's more accountability to it, because it's a workflow process. Like we really have is a workflow platform. It's straightforward. This vendor does this other vendor does that. So there's definitely a straightforward answer to that. So when it needs to be completed. So like I said, when we we have these conversations and they're like, yeah, we're turning 60 to 75 days, and that goes back into the NOI. We're like, hey, why is it so delayed, or why are you having these timelines, and I think that's where we come in and we provide that support.
Well, and especially since like there's a lot more there's a lot more spend involved in it right now. Like, and it's is it to a standardization approach, your conversation earlier, like is it typically like in a single building, units are rented the same way? Like are they moving to a new standard, like taking out the white fridges and putting stainless steel, taking out the carpet and putting in laminate? Like, is there always the same model in a single building?
Yeah, traditionally, yeah. There's they follow that model, or we kind of help kind of get to that model. It can vary between property. It's not always going to be maybe across the portfolio, but
Hmm.
in essence, there's their tier system. There's like a 1, 2, 3 kind of model where you know uh, certain properties kind of do more than the others, but there's really a structure to it, or at least there needs to be, so that you understand and that's where kind of data is important, where you see where you're losing or you're gaining. So
Hmm.
taking that approach and building off of that, I think can really help turn that property around.
So why do people choose to renovate? What are they trying to achieve?
I mean, it really boils. I mean, there's a couple of different, I think, things that come kind of take play to that. It's like
Hmm.
trends, property conditions, or or what happened to when the previous renter had it. It's like
Yeah.
certain things kind of take place. So I think sometimes it depends. Sometimes they're buying these properties to kind of get them better, or hold them for a little bit, medium hold them or something, and they want to make them better. Or right now with the times, I think things kind of all over the place in different markets. But yeah, there's just a different scenarios for what these properties are doing. But I
Right.
think
Interesting. So it's owner by owner on if they are seeking to to what the renovation looks like, what their goals are for that renovation. Because it could be repair, but it could be renovate in order to drive higher rents. It could be renovate to maybe transition the whole building, kind of like unit by unit. So
right,
if it's like whatever, call it 150 units, then every turn, and we get 50% turnover a year. So I'm going to have, let's call it maybe 60 turns a year, 60 to 75 turns a year. And so I'm going to transition every single unit by unit using this like template. So I'm going to take out all the white fridges, put in stainless steel. I'm going to take out all the carpet. I'm going to put in laminate. I'm going to take out all of the single handle faucets. I'm going to put in two handle faucets, like that, kind of like A to B. And that's hard to manage in addition to kind of managing everything else. But if I buy RenoWise, then I can kind of like template that solution and manage that with all the software. Is that right?
yeah. In a nutshell, because like back to kind of what you're mentioning is sometimes they want to have that structure, they're building off that structure. Maybe it's a spreadsheet living in a drive that like shows like kind of what the
You want to
concepts
do
look
that.
like or what they're ordering for certain properties. But in reality, that's where kind of things, there's no control. So sometimes they deviate from those standardizations
Mhm.
because there is no control. Whereas inside of RenoWise, they will have better control because everyone knows exactly what's going to happen and what's going to take place from the initial intake. Hey, when you request that unit, if we have the rent roll, we know exactly what that specific floor plan
Mhm.
unit type is already doing. We make it very clear so that there's more transparency to that, and more accountability on areas where they need to deviate. But there is certain circumstances where things might be a little different for that specific unit, and that's where the approval kind of takes place. We're like, hey, this unit's a little different, or we stepped into this unit, this other situation happened, and hey, we need an approval. So a
Mhm.
change order can take place inside the RenoWise, or we can have the communication in there to know exactly what needs to change.
And changers are a huge headache.
Oh yeah, and depending on what kind of tool or system they're using, I mean, and then it could be scattered in that scenario as well because they're already managing different ways to kind of communicate. So now a change order kind of takes place and kind of shifts everything, and then until the change order is addressed, or sometimes it's not even addressed, and the unit gets closed up, everything, the new you know the new tenant moves in, and invoices don't get paid or invoices are scattered. So now there's like more transparency to it, more visibility,
Mhm.
and accountability for that matter.
Mhm. When you're out there talking to buyers, like what kind of objections do you get from them when they when they start say no, or maybe not now?
I mean, it's really like, oh, we already have a system.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, most of the time it's systems that I've already mentioned.
Excel.
Um, maybe like saying their team knows how to manage it. They don't want another platform. And then I lean into mostly just how do you track delays? How
Yeah.
do you manage turnover? What's your average turn time? And and most of the time, there's no real answer. And like I said, they're just they're surviving that process.
Mhm.
They're not really leading it. They're not really controlling it. And that's kind of where we come in, and that's where we can be transparent with each other, because I think addressing it and being clear, back to being empathetic on what I mentioned
Yeah.
prior, was it's really understanding that, and that's kind of where we evolved, from my own frustrations of dealing with that
Sure.
uh, that
Well,
nature.
I think that, like, I think for everyone to recognize it, it's kind of like upside down a little bit, in that typically the general contractor runs the project. But this is like, in a reno turn scenario, it's backwards, because the customer is the PM, is the property manager, and they're running the reno project. And so maybe typical general contractor software doesn't really work because they're trying to solve a different problem.
Right, exactly. And sometimes these GCs are using other different, and maybe like a
Sure.
Procore, and where it's not managed correctly, or they're focused on different aspects of the project. So
Yeah.
it's
But that's like the Procore is for the GC, not for the customer.
right. So then you're relying, and then there's so many different people using different systems, but there's no centralization for it, or there's no,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just
So
kind
that's
of.
a curious question. Like, when someone's looking to solve this problem, if they've said, we've looked at software, would they haven't looked at a Procore or a Buildertrend or a Build Pro or
They, they, they might. I mean, there's like maybe when some ownerships have like renovation teams, they
Mhm.
might already be using like Procore, or some level of that, where
Mhm.
they're trying to manage their turns, they're trying to manage their renovations in some way, some level. But I don't think it doesn't give you everything you need. I mean, it's kind of like in Asana, where you're managing certain things and certain aspects of what you're
Yeah.
doing, but it's never there. And at the end, you're just kind of back to managing all these other, using different tools to kind of get that going.
Well, they're also not built for the owner, for the customer, right? They're built
Yeah,
for the GC, which is
yeah,
managing different things. They're managing, like, you're managing payables, they're managing receivables, you're managing like scope creep, they're managing scope, growth. It's like the opposite of everything.
yeah. And that's why I like to think we're essentially not a software company. We're a standardization company that just
Yeah,
happens to use software to solve the problem.
I get it. I get it.
Because
Um, so when they're looking to evaluate change, like, is there usually some sort of a time horizon that's forcing change?
yeah, I mean, it could be, but we're so, they might be so used to these processes, or the outdated
Well, that's the
systems.
whole thing. Like, if they're
Yeah,
surviving it, you kind of like, how do you get them out of the surviving it mode? Is it and is it just like, is it an external force? Like, all of a sudden 30 units are coming up, and like there's just no planet where they can manage that themselves.
yeah. I mean, I think it boils down to, if they're ready to actually make a change, and
Mhm.
actually, you know stop bleeding, and
Yeah.
put all these fires, because ideally, like I said, we're really focused on bringing that transparency to light, and on our already kind of pushing away system, like it's a, even on the construction side, even on the, on the multifamily side, they're so reluctant to change. So I think um it's really when the kind of stuff hits the fan.
Yeah. So you brought up transparency a ton. So why are things not transparent now?
Because it's so scattered, and
Mhm.
it's chaos. I mean, I come from the chaos where, like, well, although we were the vendor, but we were really involved in those projects where timelines were important, but things went wrong, and it's either the vendor's problem or the GC's
Mhm.
problem, or and then just like the point of the finger, and that's, I think, where we lost transparency, where we couldn't just be real and upfront, and bring it all together, and everyone could see, that's kind of what we're doing. We're bringing it all together. The
Mhm.
visibility and accountability is front and center. So transparency kind of just flows. And
Huh. So take a look. Like so you've been at this for a year plus now. At RenoWise?
yeah. We're tracking for a year pretty soon here.
Good for you guys. That's awesome. And so when you take a look back at yourself, like even when you're in your supply side of things, you're still in a sales role, right? So an account
Yeah.
management role. So like you take a look back and give yourself some advice, and when you're with Lowe's and those guys, like you had numbers and quarters and all those things you had to meet. How did what advice did you give yourself, a younger self, or maybe people that are joining RenoWise, like about finding hell yes?
Yeah, I mean, advice for like anyone who's out there trying to sell and
Yeah, or even like you said, things that you've learned in your life, things that you have mentored other people, or even just like, yeah, like what you would do differently.
yeah, I mean, stop pushing features. Stop trying to
Yeah,
all the bells and whistles. Just be be transparent. Start asking the right questions,
yeah,
and really understand the pain points. I think we get lost in translation with trying to offer everything that we miss the whole concept of what they really need. So I think
yeah.
that's for us, and maybe I have a little more autonomy now, being able to actually support that message. But even then, back when I was doing it, I knew exactly where I was limited and where
Mhm.
I need to be transparent with the client and say, hey, this is kind of where it's at, but I'd love to support it, and just being transparent, being empathetic, understand their pain points,
Mhm.
and really drive that.
Awesome, love it. What's the best way people get a hold of you?
Check us out, or check me out at LinkedIn. Reach out to me, Jose Benitez, or RenoWise.com. RenoWise on all socials. But yeah, that's how people can get a hold of me.
Oh, fantastic! And if you guys are looking for help on your renovation and turns process, that's not transparent. That is a lot of work, and probably, especially these days, there's a lot of lift that's happening for an overworked property manager. You guys can be helped out. RenoWise will help you out. Get that head above water and keep it above water by standardizing all those experiences. Oh, that's awesome. Appreciate it, man. I know there's a lot of pain in that world, and it seems to be something that is just like a gray process that no one really thinks about, but it's happening like 50, almost every single day, right? And so why is it so vague, murky, and all paper handoffs? Like it doesn't make any sense. I get you there.
Yeah, exactly. And super excited to bridge that gap, right?
Yeah,
And that's kind of what exists now.
I get
um,
you.
because if teams are still managing chaos through memory and spreadsheets and duct tape, we're built. We're the system built for what they've been waiting for. So super excited to
That's
hit
awesome.
the ground running with that.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for listening in today. Appreciate the little pieces of advice around discovering, asking questions, and seeking to understand the pain points that are driving motivation. Who should we talk? Oh, one thing I forgot. Who should we talk to next?
I don't know if you've connected with her at any point, but Stacy Hampton. She's
I do not
she's
know Stacey Hansen. Where's she
providing
at?
a lot of value in the industry, and she's got her own thing going. It's Asset NOI.
Okay.
I connect with her. She can bring a lot of value to the podcast, and I think
Love
bring
them
some.
cats. I mean, especially around NOI, that's a healthy conversation any day of the week. Fantastic. Well, everyone listening on the podcast today, appreciate you guys listening in. If you're listening to this live or not live, you can catch things. You can add comments to the stream later on. We'll both get notified. We can jump in with answers to any questions you might have. If you listen to the podcast on Apple or Spotify, please click like or subscribe. Those things are awesome for people, making it easy for people to find us. And again, this is brought to you by IRCX. We're a remote maintenance software for property management. We help you solve the triage and the trips problem, all rating around, speeding up, and making maintenance a lot more cost effective. Thanks, everybody, for listening in today. Thanks, Jose, for all of your input and advice.
Thank
This
you.
is an awesome problem to solve, and
It's a
certainly the
pleasure.
world needs it these days. All right. Take care, everyone.
Awesome.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.